The rain pounded the roof of the old diner, a relentless drumbeat that drowned out the world. Ellie Harper, barely 20, sat in a cracked vinyl booth, her fingers tracing the scars on her knuckles, marks from a childhood she'd fought to forget. Across from her, Lena Castillo's soft brown eyes held a question she was too afraid to ask. Ellie's heart raced as she leaned forward, her voice barely above a whisper. "I told her, Lena. I told Mom I'm in love with you." The words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of truth and the terror of what came next. Lena's hand trembled as she reached for Ellie's, her touch a lifeline in the storm brewing inside them both. They'd met 2 years ago at a community college in their small Ohio town, a place where secrets festered behind picket fences. Ellie, with her sharp wit and guarded smile, had been drawn to Lena's quiet warmth, the way she laughed like she was sharing a secret with the universe. Their friendship had bloomed into something more, something neither had dared name until now. But coming out in a town like theirs wasn't just a confession, it was a declaration of war. Ellie's childhood had been a battlefield. At 7, she'd fled her father's rage, his fists a constant threat in their crumbling trailer. Her mother, Diane, had taken her away, promising safety, building a fragile new life in this nowhere town. For years, Ellie believed she'd escaped him. But last night, everything shattered. "I can't believe she did this," Ellie said, her voice cracking. She called him. She told him I'm like this. Lena's grip tightened, but Ellie pulled back, her eyes darting to the diner's foggy window. "She thinks he can fix me." Lena's face paled. "Your dad." The one who she stopped. The unspoken horror too heavy to voice. Ellie nodded, her jaw tight. Diane had always been devout, clinging to the church's promises of salvation. But this betrayal cut deeper than Ellie could have imagined. Her mother had reached out to the man who'd haunted her nightmares, believing he could save her daughter from who she was. The diner door swung open, and a gust of cold air swept in. Ellie's breath caught as she recognized the silhouette in the doorway, her mother's rigid posture, the familiar cross necklace glinting under the fluorescent lights. Diane's eyes locked onto them, her lips a thin line of disapproval. "Ellie, we need to talk," Diane said, her voice clipped. "Now." Lena stood, her small frame bristling with defiance. "She's not going anywhere with you unless she wants to." Ellie's heart swelled at Lena's courage, but fear coiled in her gut. Diane's gaze flicked to Lena, sharp and dismissive, before settling back on her daughter. "You're coming home," Diane said. "He's waiting." Ellie's blood ran cold. He could only mean one person. The man who'd left scars on her body and soul. The man she'd spent 13 years running from. She grabbed Lena's hand, anchoring herself to the present, to the woman who made her feel whole. "I'm not a kid anymore," Ellie said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her chest. "You don't get to decide who I am." Diane's face twisted, a mix of anger and desperation. "You're my daughter. I'm trying to save you from this sin." The word landed like a slap, and Lena flinched beside her. Ellie wanted to scream, to tear down the walls of this suffocating town, but all she could do was hold Lena's hand tighter. The diner's other patrons pretended not to notice, their forks scraping plates in awkward silence. Ellie's mind raced. She'd fought too hard to be free, to love who she wanted, to let her mother drag her back into that darkness. But the thought of her father's voice, his fists made her feel 7 again, small and powerless. Lena leaned close, her whisper fierce. "We'll figure this out. Together." Her words were a spark, igniting something in Ellie. She wasn't alone anymore. She had Lena, and that was worth fighting for. Diane stepped closer, her voice softening but no less firm. He's changed. Ellie. He's been sober for years. He wants to make things right. The words felt like a betrayal, each one a knife twisting deeper. Ellie didn't believe in her father's redemption. She'd seen too much to trust in miracles. The rain outside slowed to a drizzle, but the storm inside Ellie was just beginning. She stood, pulling Lena with her. "I'm not going back," she said, her voice ringing with a strength she didn't know she had. "Not to him. Not to you." Diane's eyes widened, but before she could respond, Ellie and Lena were out the door, the cold air hitting their faces like a wake-up call. They ran hand in hand down the empty street, the weight of the moment pressing down on them. Ellie didn't know where they were going, only that they couldn't stay still. As they reached the edge of town, Ellie's phone buzzed in her pocket. She ignored it, but the vibration felt like a warning. Her father was back, and her mother had opened the door to him. The life she'd built, the love she'd found, was under threat. But Ellie wasn't 7 anymore. She was a fighter, and she'd protect what mattered most. The streetlights flickered as Ellie and Lena ducked into a narrow alley, their breaths visible in the chilly night air. Ellie's pulse thundered in her ears, each step a rebellion against the life her mother wanted to force her back into. Lena's hand in hers was the only thing keeping her grounded. "Where are we going?" Lena asked, her voice soft but urgent. Her dark hair clung to her face, damp from the drizzle. Ellie didn't have an answer. Her apartment, a cramped studio above a laundromat, wasn't safe, not with her mother knowing where she lived. And Lena's place, shared with her overprotective older brother, wasn't an option either. "I don't know," Ellie admitted, slowing to a stop. The alley smelled of wet asphalt and regret. I can't face him. Lena." "Not again." Her voice broke, and she hated how small it made her feel. She'd spent years rebuilding herself, piece by piece, only for her mother to tear it all down in one phone call. Lena stepped closer, her eyes fierce with loyalty. "You don't have to. We'll find a way out of this." She brushed a strand of hair from Ellie's face, her touch gentle but electric. For a moment, the world shrank to just the two of them, their shared breath a quiet act of defiance. But reality crashed back in. Ellie's phone buzzed again. A text from her mother. "He's at the house. Come home now." She shoved the phone into her pocket, her stomach churning. The idea of her father in their home, sitting at the kitchen table where she'd once felt safe, made her want to scream. "We need a plan," Lena said, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. "Somewhere to go? At least for tonight." She pulled out her own phone, scrolling through contacts. "My friend Rose Ash got a spare room. She's cool. Ellie. She won't judge us." Ellie nodded, grateful but uneasy. Rosa was a classmate, openly queer and unapologetic, but asking for help meant admitting how bad things had gotten. Still, they had no choice. "Okay," she said. "Let's go." The walk to Rosa's apartment was tense, the town's quiet streets feeling like a trap waiting to spring. Ellie kept glancing over her shoulder, half expecting her father's shadow to loom out of the darkness. She hadn't seen him in 13 years, but his face was burned into her memory-hard jaw. Cold eyes, the kind of man who broke things just to feel powerful. Rosa's place was a small, colorful apartment above a bookstore, filled with plants and mismatched furniture. Rosa, a wiry woman with a buzz cut and a warm smile, didn't ask questions. "You two look like you've seen a ghost," she said, handing them towels to dry off. "Crash here as long as you need." Ellie sank onto the couch, her body heavy with exhaustion. Lena sat beside her, their knees touching. Rosa busied herself in the kitchen, giving them space. "What do we do now?" Ellie whispered, her voice raw. "I can't keep running forever." Lena took her hand, her thumb tracing small circles on Ellie's palm. "You're not running. You're fighting. There's a difference." Her words were a lifeline, pulling Ellie back from the edge of despair. But the fear lingered, a shadow that refused to fade. They spent the night talking in hushed tones, piecing together a plan. Lena suggested moving to Columbus, a bigger city where they could blend in, start fresh. Ellie wanted to believe it was possible, but the weight of her past felt like chains holding her back. Her father's return wasn't just a threat, it was a reminder of everything she'd tried to bury. In the morning, Rosa drove them to the community college to pick up their things. The campus was quiet, the early hour keeping most students away. But as they crossed the quad, Ellie froze. A man stood by the parking lot, his broad shoulders and heavy boots unmistakable. It was him. "Ellie," Lena whispered, grabbing her arm. "Is that?" "Yeah," Ellie said, her voice barely audible. Her father's eyes locked onto hers, and the world tilted. He didn't move, didn't call out, but his presence was a storm cloud, dark and suffocating. Ellie's scars ached, as if her body remembered his fists better than her mind did. Lena tugged her toward the building. "Come on. We're not doing this now." Ellie let herself be pulled away, her legs moving on autopilot. Inside, they grabbed their books and laptops, their hands shaking. Rosa waited in the car, her expression grim when they told her what they'd seen. "He didn't follow us," Rosa said, checking the rearview mirror as they drove away. "But you two need to decide what's next. Fast." Ellie's mind raced. She wanted to confront her father, to scream at him for the years he'd stolen, but the thought made her feel small again. Lena's hand found hers, steady and warm. "We'll figure it out," Lena said again, her voice a promise. Back at Rosa's, they sat down with a map and a laptop, searching for apartments in Columbus. The idea of leaving felt like both a betrayal and a salvation. Ellie's mother had been her rock once, but now she was the one tearing their family apart. And her father, Ellie didn't know if he'd truly changed, but she wasn't willing to find out. As night fell, Ellie and Lena curled up on Rosa's couch, the weight of the day pressing down on them. "I love you," Ellie whispered, the words a quiet rebellion against the chaos around them. Lena smiled, her eyes shining with tears. "I love you too," she said, "and I'm not letting you face this alone." The next morning, Ellie woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of Rosa's laughter from the kitchen. For a moment, she forgot the weight on her shoulders, the looming threat of her father's return. Lena was still asleep beside her, her face peaceful in the soft light filtering through the curtains. But peace was fleeting. Ellie's phone buzzed on the coffee table, a string of missed calls from her mother. She ignored them, but the final message made her heart stop. "He's coming to find you. He just wants to talk." Ellie's hands shook as she showed Lena the text. The room felt smaller, the walls closing in. "We need to leave," Lena said, her voice firm. "Today?" Rosa, overhearing, nodded from the kitchen doorway. She'd already offered to drive them to the bus station, her old pickup truck their ticket out of town. Ellie hesitated. Leaving meant abandoning the life she'd built, her job at the library, her classes, the fragile sense of home she'd carved out. But staying meant facing her father, and she wasn't ready for that. Maybe she never would be. They packed light, stuffing clothes and essentials into backpacks. Rosa drove them through the quiet streets, the town still asleep under a gray sky. At the bus station, Ellie's nerves were raw. Every stranger's face a potential threat. Lena stayed close, her presence a steady anchor. The bus to Columbus was half empty, its engine rumbling like a promise of escape. Ellie and Lena took seats near the back, their hands intertwined. As the bus pulled away, Ellie watched the town fade into the distance, a mix of relief and grief settling in her chest. She was leaving her mother behind, but also the pain that had defined her childhood. The ride was quiet, the hum of the engine filling the silence. Lena leaned her head on Ellie's shoulder, her warmth a reminder of why they were doing this. "What do you want our life to be like?" Lena asked, her voice soft. "In Columbus, I mean." Ellie thought for a moment, her mind conjuring images of a small apartment, music playing softly, Lena's laughter filling the space. "I want us to be free," she said. "To be ourselves, without anyone telling us it's wrong." Lena smiled, squeezing her hand. But freedom came with a cost. Halfway to Columbus, Ellie's phone lit up again. This time, it was a number she didn't recognize. Against her better judgment, she answered. "Ellie." The voice was gravelly, familiar in a way that made her skin crawl. "Her father." "I just want to talk, kid. I'm not who I was." Her throat tightened, words failing her. Lena's eyes widened, and she grabbed the phone, ending the call before Ellie could respond. "You don't owe him anything," Lena said, her voice fierce. "Not a word." Ellie nodded, but the call had shaken her. Her father's voice brought back memories she'd buried nights hiding under her bed, her mother's muffled sobs through thin walls. She'd been 7 when they left him, but the fear had never really gone away. In Columbus, they found a cheap motel for the night, its neon sign buzzing outside their window. Lena searched for apartments on her phone while Ellie paced, her mind racing. "What if he finds us?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "What if Mom keeps helping him?" Lena set her phone down, crossing the room to pull Ellie into a hug. "Then we keep moving. We keep fighting. He doesn't get to win." Her words were a vow, and Ellie clung to them, her face buried in Lena's shoulder. The next day, they met with a realtor, a kind woman who showed them a tiny one-bedroom apartment in a bustling neighborhood. It wasn't much peeling paint, creaky floors, but it was theirs. They signed the lease with shaking hands, the weight of their decision settling in. This was their chance to start over, to build something new. But the past wasn't done with them. That evening, as they unpacked their few belongings, a knock came at the door. Ellie froze, her heart pounding. Lena peered through the peephole, her face paling. "It's your mom," she whispered. Ellie opened the door, her body tense. Diane stood there, her eyes red-rimmed, clutching her purse like a shield. "I didn't know where else to go," she said, her voice breaking. He's not the man I thought he was." Ellie's anger flared, but something in her mother's expression stopped her. Diane looked broken, the weight of her choices etched into her face. "Can I come in?" she asked. Lena stepped forward, her voice calm but firm. "Only if you're here to listen, not to preach." Diane nodded, and Ellie stepped aside, her heart a tangle of hope and distrust. As they sat down, the air thick with unspoken words, Ellie realized this was only the beginning. The fight for her freedom, for her love, was far from over. The apartment smelled of fresh paint and possibility, but the tension between Ellie, Lena, and Diane was suffocating. They sat in a triangle, Ellie on the couch, Lena beside her, and Diane on a rickety chair, her hands twisting in her lap. The silence was heavy, broken only by the distant hum of city traffic. "I thought he'd changed," Diane said finally, her voice small. "He said he'd found God, that he was sober." I thought he could help us." Her eyes darted to Ellie, pleading for understanding. But Ellie's face was stone. "Help us." Ellie's voice was sharp, cutting through the room. "You brought him back into my life, Mom. After everything he did." Her scars itched, a phantom pain that flared with her anger. Lena's hand found hers, a silent reminder to breathe. Diane's shoulders sagged. "I was wrong," she whispered. "I saw him today, and he hasn't changed." "Not really." Her voice cracked, and Ellie saw the truth in her mother's eyes. Diane had wanted to believe in redemption, but she'd been wrong. Again. Lena spoke, her tone gentle but unyielding. "Why are you here, Diane? To apologize? Or to try to fix Ellie again?" The question hung in the air, raw and unflinching. Ellie's heart pounded, torn between wanting to forgive her mother and wanting to scream. "I'm here because I love you," Diane said, looking at Ellie. "I don't understand this." She gestured vaguely at Ellie and Lena's clasped hands. "But I don't want to lose you." Tears spilled down her cheeks, and for the first time, Ellie saw her mother not as the woman who'd betrayed her, but as someone lost in her own fears. Ellie wanted to believe her, but trust was a fragile thing, shattered by years of pain. "You hurt me," she said, her voice steady despite the ache in her chest. "You chose him over me." Diane flinched, but she didn't look away. "I know. And I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make that right." The words were raw, a promise Ellie wasn't sure she could accept. But they were a start. The next few days were a blur of adjustment. Diane stayed in a nearby motel, giving Ellie and Lena space while they settled into their new life. The apartment became a sanctuary, filled with small acts of love. Lena cooking dinner, Ellie hanging fairy lights, their laughter a defiance of the past. But the shadow of Ellie's father lingered, a threat they couldn't ignore. Lena found a job at a local bookstore, her charm winning over the owner. Ellie took shifts at a coffee shop, the routine grounding her. They were building something, piece by piece, but the fear of her father finding them never faded. Every creak of the floorboards, every unfamiliar face, set Ellie's nerves on edge. One evening, as they walked home from the bookstore, Lena stopped suddenly. "Ellie," she said, her voice tight. "Don't turn around." Ellie's heart sank as she followed Lena's gaze to a figure across the street, her father, standing under a street lamp, watching them. Panic surged, but Ellie forced herself to stay calm. "Keep walking," she said, her voice low. They picked up their pace, weaving through the crowded sidewalk. When they glanced back, he was gone, but the encounter left Ellie shaken. He was closer than she'd thought, and her mother's betrayal had given him a map to find her. Back at the apartment, Ellie locked the door, her hands trembling. Lena pulled her into a hug, her voice fierce. "He doesn't get to control you anymore. We'll protect each other." Ellie nodded, but the fear was a living thing, clawing at her insides. They decided to take precautions. Lena installed a new lock on the door, and they shared their location with Rosa, who'd become a fierce ally. Ellie considered a restraining order, but the thought of facing her father in court made her stomach churn. Instead, they focused on building their life, refusing to let fear define them. Diane visited again, bringing coffee and an apology in the form of a handwritten letter. Ellie read it alone, her eyes stinging at her mother's words. "I failed you, but I want to learn. I want to be better." It wasn't enough to erase the pain, but it was a step. Ellie tucked the letter away, unsure if she could forgive but willing to try. As the weeks passed, Ellie and Lena found a rhythm. They explored Columbus, discovering queer-friendly cafes and bookstores, places where they could hold hands without fear. Their love grew stronger, a quiet rebellion against the world that tried to tear them apart. But Ellie knew the fight wasn't over. Her father was out there, and she'd have to face him eventually on her terms, not his. Winter settled over Columbus, blanketing the city in snow and silence. Ellie and Lena's apartment was a warm haven, filled with the scent of cinnamon and the soft glow of Christmas lights they'd strung up together. But the peace was fragile, a thin layer over the fear that still lingered in Ellie's heart. Diane had started visiting regularly, her efforts to rebuild their relationship cautious but sincere. She listened when Ellie talked about Lena, asked questions, and tried to understand. It wasn't perfect. Diane still flinched at their affection sometimes, but she was trying, and that meant something. Ellie hadn't forgiven her fully, but she was learning to let her mother back in, one small step at a time. The threat of Ellie's father, though, was a shadow they couldn't shake. They'd seen him twice more, always at a distance, his presence a silent warning. Ellie had finally filed for a restraining order, her hands shaking as she signed the papers. The process was slow, but it gave her a sense of control, something she hadn't had at 7. One evening, as Ellie and Lena decorated a tiny Christmas tree, a knock at the door shattered the calm. Ellie's heart leapt to her throat. Lena checked the peephole, her face paling. "It's him," she whispered. Ellie's knees buckled, but she forced herself to stand tall. "Call the police," she said, her voice steady despite the fear clawing at her. Lena nodded, already dialing 911. Ellie approached the door, her scars burning with memory. She wouldn't open it, but she needed to face him, even if only through the wood. "Ellie." His voice was rough, tinged with something that might have been regret. "I just want to talk. I'm not here to hurt you." The words were a lie, or at least she couldn't trust them. She'd heard them before, as a child, before his fists found her. "You don't get to talk to me," Ellie said, her voice loud enough to carry through the door. "You lost that right when I was 7. Her hands shook, but her words were fire, fueled by years of pain and survival. He didn't respond immediately, and for a moment, she thought he'd left. Then, a quieter voice, "I'm sorry, kid. I know I messed up." The apology felt hollow, too late to undo the damage. Ellie's eyes stung, but she refused to cry. The police arrived minutes later, their lights flashing through the window. Ellie watched from behind the curtain as they escorted her father away. His shoulders slumped. He didn't resist, didn't look back. It wasn't closure, not really, but it was a victory. She'd faced him and hadn't broken. Lena wrapped her arms around Ellie, her warmth a balm to the raw edges of the moment. "You were incredible," she said, her voice thick with pride. Ellie leaned into her, letting the tears come now, not from fear, but from release. In the weeks that followed, the restraining order was granted, and Ellie's father disappeared from their lives, at least for now. Diane moved closer to Columbus, renting a small apartment and joining a support group for parents of queer kids. She was learning, slowly, to let go of her old beliefs and embrace her daughter's truth. Ellie and Lena's love grew stronger, rooted in the battles they'd fought together. They celebrated their first Christmas in the apartment, surrounded by Rosa and a few new friends from the city's queer community. Laughter filled the room, a sound Ellie once thought she'd never hear again. One night, as snow fell outside, Ellie and Lena sat on their couch, wrapped in a blanket. "I used to think I'd never escape him," Ellie said, her voice soft. "But you showed me I could be more than my past." Lena smiled, her eyes shining. "You showed yourself. I just held your hand." They kissed, the world outside fading away. Ellie knew the scars would always be there, physical and emotional, but they no longer defined her. She'd escaped. Not just her father, but the fear that had held her back. Their life wasn't perfect. There were still whispers in the city, moments of judgment. But Ellie and Lena faced them together. They'd built a home, not just in their apartment, but in each other. And in that love, Ellie found something she'd never had as a child: peace. The future stretched out before them, uncertain but bright. Ellie didn't know what challenges lay ahead, but she knew one thing for certain: she and Lena would face them side by side, their love a beacon in the dark. And that was enough.